Hey there, true believers. Welcome back to the Bear Your Shield podcast. I'm your host, Ron Scheffler. And we're back in our sermon series today, back in Genesis. Now, last time we were together, we were in Genesis 15, and God just solidified the covenant with Abram. But today we're going to be getting into Genesis 16, and we're going to break this down in a couple of sections here. We'll be reading Genesis 16, verses 1 through 6 in the English Standard Version. So buckle up, and here we go. Chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram her husband as a wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Okay, so as we take a look at the words here, Sarai has yet to have children. And now she knows of what God has told Abram. Certainly they have talked. The covenant was made between God and Abraham just last chapter, for crying out loud. Now, we don't know how much time exactly has passed between the chapters here, but we know that it was 10 years since they entered the land of Canaan. We can suspect that someone thought there was a delay in the fulfillment of God's timing, right? And let me say, Sarai or Abram, or both, may have thought there was a delay in God keeping his covenantal promise. But that would be a misunderstanding. This all has to do with God's timing, not man's. God is going to fulfill his promises on his time and for the right reasons. We shouldn't try and push our own agenda to get the desired results. It simply just won't work when it comes to divine promises. So we know Sarai is barren and advanced in years, and by all human thinking, Abram's heir is probably not coming through Sarai. However, there is so much more to showcase here than mere human understanding. That is small-mindedness. Suffice to say that Sarai becomes impatient, and perhaps Abram as well. Now, before we get into the soap opera storyline here, let's understand the customs of the ancient world first. It was a legal custom of that day that a barren woman could give her servant to her husband as his wife, and the child born to the servant would be considered the child of wife number one. Kind of sketchy, but there you have it. It was accepted in the ancient world. Abram and Sarai were attempting to carry out God's promises in their own strength. And you have to kind of admit that there's a little bit of irony here. A couple of real oldsters attempting to carry this out in their own strength. I would think they might consider, at their age, that perhaps they would have thought they didn't have enough strength, even combined perhaps. And perhaps they should really wait on God. Now, it's a fairly foregone conclusion that Abram goes along with his wife's suggestion here. She promotes having him go into her servant, Hagar. And I can kind of hear Abram thinking in his mind, oh, okay, I'll go and have sex with Hagar, your Egyptian servant, if I have to. I've been in men's ministry for many years, and I've heard all sorts of excuses, free passes, if you will, and this just smells like another excuse. Even though it was culturally acceptable, I still feel like this was just an excuse to push things forward in their own time and maybe getting away with some other things. But Sarai has this plan. Abram agrees to it, and things seem to work out. But when we do things in our own power that is contrary to what God has planned, there will be trouble. Remember back in one of the earlier shows, God tells Abram to leave his country, to leave his family. And what does Abram do? He brings his family along. He brings his father. He brings his nephew Lot, right? His journey gets waylaid because of his dad. They kind of settle into another town. And then all the problems to date with his nephew Lot. Well, here we go again. Because of human impatience, Hagar becomes pregnant, and suddenly there are too many captains in the submarine. Hagar looks down at Sarai. There is hostility and displeasure in the home. And Sarai takes this out on Abram, too, who, acting weakly, just tells Sarai to deal with it. He was all for going in and helping out when things look positive from his point of view. But now when things get a little dicey, he's backing out. But she does deal with it in her own way, and she deals with it in a harsh way, and Hagar flees. So like Hagar, let's motor on to the rest of the chapter. Chapter 16, verses 7 through 16. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. And the angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that it cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Bir-lahai-roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So Hagar is approached by the angel of the Lord on her way back to her homeland, Egypt. The angel of the Lord asks her a couple of questions, and after answering, he tells her to return to Sarai and submit to her authority. But then an interesting thing happens. She is told she will have a son, and similar to Abram's promise from God, she too will have generations too numerous to count in her lineage. Then we have a naming aspect of the story here. Hagar is told to name the boy Ishmael, meaning God hears. The Lord has listened to your affliction, the angel said. So in turn, Hagar called the living God the one who sees. In other words, looking out for her. So in these few verses is a whole lot of theology. God hears and God sees. God spoke and Hagar responded in faith. It was not going to be easy for her to go back to Abram and Sarai. But God saw Hagar's distress and heard the pain. And when she returned, Abram had to have felt guilty in some aspect, especially when Hagar told Abram what God stated. She had to go back and say, this is what God said, and I'm supposed to name him Ishmael. So one, Abram was probably surprised to hear that God told her something after all that he himself was told by God, and then what he actually told her. The boy would be called Ishmael, or God hears. Someone was listening, and it wasn't Abram or Sarai recently. The lesson here is that we as Christians are to trust God's word, his timing, and his fulfillment by being patient. Sometimes enduring things we wish we didn't have to. What's happening right now in your life? Whatever it is that you're facing right now. Maybe it's a wayward child of yours, a rocky relationship, perhaps one lacking love. Maybe you find yourself out of a job or in one that you just can't stand, and you're asking and waiting for God to send something new. Maybe some past sin that continues to haunt you is really on you right now. Perhaps you're in the midst of some financial crisis, or maybe a possible venture or adventure, a move. Maybe you're trying to have children, trying to change something in your life for the better. Maybe you're in a period of your life where you feel you're in a cave, or nothing seems to be going right. God hears. God sees. Listen for him. Reach out to him. He's waiting. You know, when we make decisions, we need to seek out which direction God wants us to go, what he wants us to do, because our choices can bring about peace or disruption, calmness or chaos. Our choices do indeed bring about results, but yet sometimes those results are consequences. Abram's decision here has so many causes and effects. Ishmael became the ancestor of the Arabs, who are still hostile to Abram's lineage, the Jews. This decision may have been even somewhat of a spur of a moment. I doubt it, but there had to be some thought process to it, but it could have been. But regardless of whether the decision was made over a long period of time or rather quickly, this was a decision made of historical proportions. In fact, this became a disaster later in the lineage of Abram, so to speak, because Joseph, the great-grandson of Sarai and Abram, would eventually be taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelites. Now, if you don't know that story, not familiar with the story of Joseph, we will get into that down the road. But let me ask you this. What decisions are you pondering in your life that you have yet to ask the Lord? Perhaps some of these need to be taken a little more seriously before you embark on the next few steps. Seek the Lord first. You can't go wrong with that approach, and you may just avoid mistakes of biblical proportions. Remember, God hears you and God sees you. He sees each and every one of us. He hears each and every one of us. It's so amazing that he wants to be that dialed into us. Man, wouldn't it be awesome if we wanted to be that dialed into him as well? Folks, thanks for listening. Until next time, Godspeed and bear your